the SAG Awards just put out their nominations for this cycle, and like the Oscars, they're being pushed back to April. Looks like the actual ceremony is going to happen on April the 4th, so still a couple months out. Obviously, they're kind of dealing with the whole ongoing pandemic situation and the eligibility windows being pushed back well beyond what they normally would be. And normally, like the SAG Awards, the Screen Actors Guild Awards, they are always targeted at on-screen performances. So some of the highlights that the trade magazines like Variety picked up on was the fact that Chadwick Boseman is in there a number of times in a posthumous kind of situation where he's nominated for the ensemble that he's part of in Da 5 Bloods. He's nominated for his work in Da 5 Bloods and in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
I see Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal, which was a movie we both love, and we both thought he was really great in it. I haven't seen Minari yet, but Stephen Yeun's in it. And the father, Anthony Hopkins, I heard is really good as well. But I don't see like a real favorite in this. In fact, I don't really see a favorite in any of the categories. I feel like it's really wide open. My thing about the SAG nominations that came out, though, was that I thought Hillbilly Elegy was a bad movie. How is it nominated for all these like acting awards? Like,
it's confusing.
They really love Amy Adams, huh?
Well, I can't remember if it was Variety or Hollywood Reporter. It was one of the trade magazines, but they were pointing out that there's something weird about Hillbilly Elegy in that it's one of those movies that contains good performances, even though the movie that is supporting them is kind of bad. Before we go too far, then let's hop into the intro and then continue this after the break, because I have a feeling this is going to develop a little bit more.
Welcome to the 90th episode of the Extra Buttery podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love film and TV. In this episode, we dive right into the SAG Awards as we did in the cold open, and we'll talk about some SAG more because we can never get enough of awards talk. And then we'll jump straight into the movies Promising Young Woman, Malcolm and Marie, and two new TV shows, Lupin and WANDAVIsion. So going back to the SAG stuff, was there anyone who really surprised you? And I mentioned Hillbilly Elegy before. That was kind of surprising. And I kind of had a feeling that Maria Bakalova in Borat 2 might get some consideration, but I didn't even think it was this serious. Like, it really looks like she could win from this, like, a list of nominees here.
If these categories end up getting kind of mapped over to the Oscars, I mean, obviously you might pick up and lose a few nominees here and there. That's just the way these things tend to work out.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it is cool to see Maria Bakalova in there for Borat 2. I'm also happy to see Minari represented in a couple of places because obviously there was a minor controversy on Twitter about how the Globes, which I remind people always that Globes don't matter. But Minari was very snubbed at the Globes for, bizarre rules reasons.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think the Golden Globes does this on purpose just because they know this will drive up like the attention?
Part of me, yeah, I'm kind of like a truther on that. I feel like
I feel like they're starting to like really give it to people and just purposely leave names off or do something controversial just so they could, drum up some buzz. Because I don't understand. Minari is an American production. It's spoken in Korean and English, but it's an American production. I don't get it. It goes back to that foreign language film thing. Like, what the hell? There are so many countries out there where English is, an official language, or a different dialect of English is an official language. Yeah. And yet somehow they don't always qualify. I don't understand.
Yeah, well, there's been some good pieces written recently about like the role of the Oscars and the overall like film world, and there are some like Bong Joon-ho has talked about how in Korea winning an Oscar doesn't really mean the same thing as it does in North America or in Britain.
Oh, even, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's still in Asia, it still means something to win an Oscar, but not quite the same thing as it does here. what role does the Oscars have in promoting international movies is the real question. It's great to see Parasite win last year. But there's still some people being like, should it have won? Should it have been an only like American slate or American and English language slate?
Well, that's what I wonder. I wonder if the Oscars are better served just only including American productions. Like, forget the international stuff, like, because you guys never do it any justice, and you guys don't know what you're talking about anyway.
Yeah.
So why don't you just focus on your own industry? Every other country's movie awards is domestically focused, right?
Yeah.
So like awards in Russia only basically focus on Russian films, and in Asia, Hong Kong, whatever, right? But for some reason, the Oscars are like, well, we got to represent everyone. And so they have all these bizarre picks.
Yeah, but and then you have to counter too, like, does an international film getting nominated for even in the best foreign language category at the Oscars, does that help raise its profile and mean that more people will end up watching it? I mean, maybe a little bit. There will be some film buffs out there who will look at that slate of nominees and say, oh, wow, these are the most important foreign language films of the year. I guess I better go watch them. So it's a catch-22, you know?
Every country's film or what their audiences prefer in film is quite different, right? So a lot of times these Oscar films that people love don't sell well overseas. Like something like Moonlight does not sell overseas.
No.
But something like Avengers definitely does. And there's no chance Avengers ever wins Best Picture. So you have to like balance, okay, well, whose criteria are we viewing it from? And you can't, as Hollywood, impose your criteria on other countries.
Yeah.
And vice versa. There are countries like French films where there are some things to us that are just like too bizarre, too violent, too sexual, or too whatever. But for the French, they're just like, hey, this is film.
Yeah.
This is what we're used to. Like, you guys are all about CGI and explosions, but that's not what we're about. We don't even like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the criteria is so different. So it's always a fun conversation, but I rarely ever agree that the best picture is the best picture of that year.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And I mean, just based on going back to the SAGs, like, it does feel like there's a bit of a consensus forming around Trial of the Chicago 7, maybe being the awards darling this year. I mean, if it...
You think so? You think that's the favorite? I don't know. Like, other than Sacha Baron Cohen.
Only because there's a few important, like, awards watcher type people, the folks who are really plugged into the industry who report on it regularly. They seem to be hearing a lot about that from their contacts in the industry. So it feels like, if the guilds, like the Screen Actors Guild and the Directors Guild and the Producers Guild, all sort of haphazardly come to the conclusion that Trial of the Chicago 7 is the green book of this year.
Well, like that's the other thing. Like, because it's so wide open, Trial of the Chicago 7 is the safest pick.
Yeah.
It's an Aaron Sorkin film. It talks about American history and it leans liberal.
Yes.
And I mean, if you look at the Five Bloods, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Minari, One Night in Miami, even News of the World, like, these are in some ways inaccessible to certain audiences. And I think Trial of Chicago 7 has just that really broad appeal. Not to mention Netflix can probably throw a whole whack of money into like the marketing campaign. And so I think you're onto something there with Trial of Chicago 7. But in my mind, there's zero chance that's the best film of the year. I think it's top 10, but it's not the best.
We talked about this last episode. Like, I'm like 3.5 out of 5 on my rating for that movie. So it's definitely not the best for me. It wasn't even on my top 10 at all. I didn't connect with it in any meaningful way. But it does feel to me like the kind of thing that would end up rising, if not winning a lot of the awards. It'll definitely be represented in a lot of the categories, it'll be a front runner in some way.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, the voting body for the Oscars tends to skew conservative. And if they don't want to make that bold pick, quote unquote bold pick, they just revert to whatever they know. So this is very much right up their alley. Speaking of films, though, so I finally caught up with Promising Young Woman.
Every week, I go to a club. I act like I'm too drunk to stand. And every week, a nice guy comes over to see if I'm okay.
You okay?
You are so pretty.
I am a nice guy.
And Carey Mulligan's nominated for Outstanding Performance. I thought she was good, but I didn't think this was her best work. And I do feel like, and maybe it's the pacing of the movie and maybe it's just the way it's told, but I did find it a little hard to relate to her. I think she's definitely like the hero of this film. She's like other than the coffee shop owner, I think she's like the one redeemable person in this film.
Yeah, well, this is kind of something I was trying to get at in the review that I put up on the site. You can head over to kinetoscope.ca if you want to read that in detail. But this film is kind of notable in the sense that it sparks some very mixed up feelings in people. And I think that's intentional. It has a very wonky rhythm. It has lots of mixed tones in terms of like black comedy versus tragedy versus thriller.
Yeah, I couldn't decide what it was.
Yeah, it's playing on various genres. It's doing a bit of a tongue-in-cheek rom-com kind of thing. It's also doing a rape revenge genre thing without ever fully committing to any single one of them. And for some people, I think that mixture of tones and flavors might leave a bad taste in your mouth. I
wouldn't say it's a bad taste, but I definitely felt like I couldn't put a thumb on it. Like I couldn't get a good understanding of it.
Yeah.
Like the story's straightforward and I understand all the things that Cassie does, which is Carey Mulligan's character. And of course, all the guys are douchebags. But at the same time, I remember you saying that like, hey, this movie doesn't really end the way you think it does.
Yes.
I didn't really find the ending that shocking. It's definitely one of those films where the hero at the end of the day still gets the upper hand and the bad guys get their comeuppance.
Yeah. And the question is like, because the movie primes you to sort of see it in the revenge fantasy light, I think it's possible to go into it, and spoiler alert warning, because we kind of have to, this is kind of key to understanding what this movie is doing. So if you haven't seen it,
okay.
Check out the time codes in the episode descriptions. You can skip over this section, get to the next bit. Essentially at the end, when we're led to believe that she has been killed by the rich dude bro who she's been targeting, Al, for the entire movie, in the back of your mind, a lot of like experienced moviegoers will probably be thinking, oh, it's just a ruse. She's going to, she's been pretending, she's been faking dead in an effort to have these guys let their guard down. And then she's going to spring up and, I don't know, tie them up or do something, get that final revenge in a very simplistic way. But instead, it turns out that she pretty much intended to be killed. She had a reasonable assumption that was going to happen. And that's very different. That's a bit of a left turn from your typical revenge fantasy thing, because you would expect your hero to not only defeat the bad guys, but to survive while doing it and to get to live her life and have some measure of happiness now that the crime has been addressed. But she uses her own death as the kind of the key part of it. And that's a really weird left turn for the movie to make. And it kind of challenges you a little bit to think like, did I want her to kill these guys? Did I want her to kind of take on this sort of bad tactics or the crime aspect of it?
Her plan was kind of poorly thought out. Like the way she like approached the bachelor party at the end of the movie, that I feel like she maybe could have thought out a little better.
But do you think it was her intention to, or do you think that was a mistake on her part? Like she didn't expect it to go so far? Or do you think that she actually planned for him to kill her?
I don't think she planned for him to kill her. I think she was just being safe. I think she was being smart and thinking one step ahead and saying like, that she had all that stuff as backup. Kind of like in The Departed, where like Leonardo DiCaprio, he dies, right? But he leaves all the recordings for Vera Farmiga's character to find. It's kind of like that. Because when we meet Cassie, she's already like this broken down character. Like she has no interest in becoming another person or going back to the person she was or forming a new life. Otherwise, she would have moved away and done something else, right? Like even her parents talk about how like you're just moping around, you're not doing anything. And the only thing that ever drives her is this revenge, right? She really becomes this femme fatale. And I thought it was really interesting that our modern day femme fatale is very much different from like the 90s femme fatales that we saw. The 90s versions were like, smoky eyed, mystery, low voice, very, very sexual. And not saying that Carey Mulligan isn't, but definitely she uses that as like a trap to ensnare men as previous femme fatale does. The only thing is that she doesn't like, smoke a long cigarette or, have a pistol, The one other thing I wanted to point out that was really spot on too was the casting. So Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Adam Brody, I think is Max Greenfield as his name, where they're the douche bros.
Yes.
I mean, you could have seen that a mile away, right? I remember in the opening scene, I saw Adam Brody and he's playing like, the nice guy. And I'm like, there's no way he is, because he's played this character in every single thing I've ever seen. Going back to his like teen days, I think it was like the OC, where like you just can't trust any of those dudes. I think they do try to make an effort to show that this isn't just one gender or one institution. So we saw Connie Britton as the dean, who basically led to her best friend's death. We saw Alfred Molina as a very repentive lawyer. And so I think it was nice to see those different balances, though.
Yeah, it wasn't just like her campaign against single dudes who are cruising the nightlife. Yeah, she's going after all the systems that kind of help these bad dudes get away with things.
And the last thing I kind of want to point out that really bugged me is, so once you start learning about her plan, it's kind of divided into chapters. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a big Roman numeral that pops up.
Yeah.
The Roman numeral for 4 is not 4 eyes. It's 1 I and 1 V. It drove me nuts when I saw that.
Isn't that supposed to reference the little tally mark she's making in her journal?
Is it?
That's how I read it.
I didn't read it that way, because I mean, you could be right, actually, now that I think of it. So she would be like number 5? Why would she consider herself as number 5, though?
I read it as she intended to die that night. And she did not formulate this kind of like bank of evidence as a failsafe. She actually was so committed to her goal and feeling like she had nothing else to live for, especially since we discovered the truth about her boyfriend, Bo Burnham's character, that she just went there knowing that the only way she could get her final revenge is if these guys had a murder on their hands and had actual blood on their hands. So she was that extreme about it, that committed to it. And
she didn't act like it, though, when like Al broke out of his cuffs. Like, she seemed genuinely surprised.
Is it like 4-dimensional chess where she wants him to feel like he's in control? It's
You watch too many Christopher Nolan movies. I definitely read it as her being surprised, and she didn't intend to die, but she made a insurance policy in case she did. That's how I read it.
Right.
So.
Well, I think it works either way. It doesn't. It's maybe a bit darker in my interpretation, but same basic outcome.
Yeah.
But I have to say, for a first film from the writer-director Emerald Fennell, she really bursts on the scene with this thing. Like, she really shows what she can do on her first attempt.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interested to see what other stuff she has up her sleeve. It's also a feather in. I said this before when we were doing our top 10 of 2020, but it's a feather in the cap for Margot Robbie's production company too, because this is the kind of material that Margot Robbie wants to get out into the world. So I'm all for it.
Speaking of, other films, I guess, but we were talking about it. Malcolm and Marie, you actually saw this just recently.
I watched this last night. Yeah, I was motivated on kind of two fronts. Like, they put out a trailer for it maybe about a month ago, and Netflix was very much going hard on the art film kind of route for this.
Oh, he's so sensitive. He's romantic. I bet he's sweet, right?
Well, I mean, yeah. When he's not being an emotional fucking terrorist.
Oh. I love the way you see the world, Marie.
Where they wanted you to feel like this was a auteur piece where it was just two actors alone in one location, hashing out their relationship problems, and it was going to be shot on celluloid, black and white. It had all of the hallmarks of like
a film nerd's dream.
Yeah. Well, in the style of Mank in many ways. I mean, granted, Mank was done on digital, but the same basic kind of flavor. And then when the movie actually dropped on Netflix, I think it wasn't this past weekend, but the weekend before, the critics came out against this in a way that I didn't expect, but that actually ended up entertaining me.
Yeah, I thought it was going to get good buzz too. So like when you told me it wasn't getting good reviews, I was kind of a little surprised.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like such artsy Oscar bait.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these like, really focused male-female dynamic films. And we saw one recently with, what was that one with Daniel Kaluuya?
Oh, Queen and Slim.
Queen and Slim, right? So it very much about two people in love, and it's kind of like the interaction with each other. I always feel like everyone's just trying to capture magic in a bottle, like the Sunset series again, the Linklater
a little
stuff,
bit, yeah,
where no one can really replicate what Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy shared, but they just try all the time. This reminds me of that. So like, just briefly, like, walk me through the story here.
Okay, well, so the story is that John David Washington plays a filmmaker, a writer-director, who has just premiered his feature debut. He'd been working as a writer in Hollywood beforehand, and now he's got a chance to produce this searing biopic about a young drug addict. And he's just come back to a rented mansion of sorts. It's well, maybe not a mansion. It's a nice house in the middle of nowhere that the production company has rented. And he's with his girlfriend, played by Zendaya. Mm-hmm. And Zendaya doesn't work as an actress. They talk about her picking up a little bit of acting work here or there, but it's not really her main profession. And John David Washington his character is in super high spirits when the movie opens because he feels like the premiere went over great. He got all kinds of critics coming up to him at the after party, giving him all these compliments, suggesting that he's the next Spike Lee, he's the next Barry Jenkins, and he just wants to celebrate. But it's clear that Zendaya's character is not feeling it. Something happened at the party that has got her really angry. And as the first act of the movie unfolds, you start to see a fight kind of blowing up almost out of nowhere. And initially, it seems like the thing that Zendaya's character, Marie, is upset about is that Malcolm, John David Washington's character, did not thank her in his speech when the movie was premiering, which seems a bit like a little bit of something that you could kind of write off. And John David Washington's character he doesn't understand. He thinks it's just like it's nothing. It's not worth talking about. But the more they fight and the more they kind of try to wound each other with their words, the more you learn about their relationship. And it's clear that there are some very deep, deep problems going on under the surface. And all that's well and good. It's a fine idea for a movie, especially one considering that this was one of the first glitzy movies shot post-COVID. So it was just Zendaya and John David Washington and a small crew in this one location for the whole time. And they made some headlines at the time for trying their best to follow all the protocols and everything, keep everybody safe. The problem is that there's not a whole lot to the movie outside of them fighting. And it starts to feel as good as the performances are and as well written to an extent that the script is, you start to feel like you're just a third wheel in a actual couple's fight. And maybe some people would find that like they take that as
it gets awkward, eh?
Yeah, it just gets awkward. Like you're not actually getting anything meaningful out of it because it feels like the two characters are only out to hurt each other constantly. And
you know what that reminds me of?
What?
Marriage Story.
Yeah, a little bit. Although at least, see, the thing about Marriage Story, and one of the reasons why I loved it, was that it balanced out those moments, those awkward couples fight moments, with actual humor and levity.
Yes.
And and other characters and things. And there were ways that the movie balanced things out and had other plot. But this is all about basically, like you pointed out, Richard Linklater's work, the Before trilogy, where it's just one unending conversation from beginning to end. That's the way this plays out. But you lose empathy for these characters because you kind of stop caring about why they're mad at each other, which is kind of essential to staying engaged with the movie. You keep thinking, or at least I kept thinking to myself, why do they keep making it worse? Why do they keep pushing each other's buttons? Like, can't they compromise? Isn't there any kind of middle ground here?
This is how Hollywood screws up every single relationship out there.
Yeah.
Because there are people who are legitimately like, if we don't fight like people do in the movies, we're not having a real relationship, right? And I think that toxicity kind of permeates through sometimes. And if the whole fight is about him not thanking her in a acceptance speech, I'd get so bored so quickly because there's no real conflict. This is about egos, and I couldn't really care less about two people who felt like their egos are bruised, you know?
And now, I mean, it does go a bit deeper than that because you eventually discover things about their relationship, like, you know, John David Washington had dated other people beforehand. And then,
of course, the classic, the old stuff just comes right out, right?
And Zendaya's actually, her character is actually more upset by the fact that this epic film that Malcolm has gotten all these accolades for is based heavily on her own life and the fact that Marie was a drug addict at a very young age, and Malcolm kind of plucked her out of that and helped her clean up and stayed with her through all of the tough times and the rehab and everything. And then he made a film about it, but then neglected to thank her about it. So all you do is you learn more and more about the egotism of Malcolm and his inability to see how much Marie brought to his current success, and then his unwillingness to yield any ground, and all of that's well and good. And you could say that this is probably a fight that a lot of real life Hollywood couples have had over and over again through the decades. You know, creative collaboration has gone sour, and, you know, people feel that they're not being thanked or appreciated in relationships. All that's fine, but it doesn't make it fun to watch. It doesn't make it all that kind of it doesn't reveal anything about these characters. It just makes you kind of just sit there and be like, man, I could have watched another Fast and the Furious movie instead of been sad for an hour and 45 minutes.
I never thought you'd use Fast and Furious as an example.
Well,
I mean, this kind of goes back because remember Kramer versus Kramer with Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman? And a lot of people had the same criticism too, where it's like, I'm done with seeing these people shout at each other. Like, it just gets so annoying. And the entire film is driven by this, I wouldn't say artificial conflict, but conflict between two people who can't just sit down and have, like, you know, an adult talk, right? This is the same criticism about movies where two heroes are always against each other until the last moments of the movie because they never just sat down and said, hey, you know what, maybe we should team up.
And now it's, you know, so the criticism that a lot of professional critics have been levying at this movie is that not only does it have this kind of interminable fight in it that you kind of sit through, but it's written by a white writer-director, Sam Levinson, who's Barry Levinson's son. Not to say it's a case of nepotism or anything, because obviously he has done good work on Euphoria with Zendaya. But people are saying that, like, you know, because he's white and his stars are black or mixed race in the Zendaya's case, I guess, there's a bit of like white privilege on the go, so that's kind of muddying the waters in the discourse around the movie. And then there's this whole bit about, and this is probably the most interesting part of the movie for me, when Malcolm goes into this rant about criticism, specifically this review from a white critic at the LA Times, and he has this very toxic relationship with, like, he wants the adoration from these critics. He wants to be told that his work is valuable. But when he finally sees the review that this gal posts on the LA Times website, and he pulls it up on his phone, and he sees that she was engaging with all the wrong parts of the movie, not the parts that he intended to be the artistic bits.
Well, that's his fault.
Yeah. So, but then he launches into this really long rant, and it starts in a good place. And I was like, yeah, you're saying a lot of really interesting things about the relationship between filmmakers and critics, and, you know, who's doing the most work, and, you know, are critics actually adding to the experience, or are they just kind of like hating on people? You know, filmmakers have complained about that for years. So he starts from a good place, but it goes, again, just like the fight between him and Marie, his rant goes on and on and on, and you're thinking to yourself, no filmmaker could ever possibly get this angry about a review that was A, positive, and B, like, just maybe slightly misguided in what it chose to talk about. I don't know. It felt like a lot, and I was not there for it.
I don't blame you. Like, these films can be really tough to sit through, and sometimes, for some people, it just might hit a little too close to home. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're really into this kind of like deep relationship, magnifying glass kind of stuff,
melodrama,
You might find something good in it. You might like to analyze the performances, which again are very good. The writing is very elaborate. So you might be able to appreciate it from a technical level. But I think as an overall package, it might be a bit of a slog.
Do you think that we're getting nitpicky or disappointed because our standards are so high, because we've seen so many really great films?
Maybe. I think it's this is a really complicated one to talk about because of its relationship with the movie business as a whole. It's about the movies. It's about how people look at movies. So there's always this kind of like voice in the back of your head saying like anything bad that you say about this movie could be diffused by somebody else saying, oh, but that's the point. It's trying to be self-referential. It's trying to be self-aware about how stupid this whole like art versus commerce thing is. And, you know, the relationship, again, like I said, the relationship of critics to filmmakers and all of that. But I don't know. Even though it had so many components that I thought I would like, it's interesting how when you put them all together, I didn't end up enjoying the experience.
Speaking of enjoyable experiences, one of the biggest series to hit Netflix that's become really popular all of a sudden is Lupin.
Yeah.
This is a French series created by George Kay and Francois Ozan. Premiered about a month ago, so we're a little late, but it's still topical.
25 years, I believe my father was a thief. I grew up with that. 25 years ago, he framed my dad.
Come on. Let go of me!
You want revenge on Pellegrini?
Who gon' stop me in my moment?
This is all a game, Inspector.
Who gon' stop me when I'm going?
A game with rules.
They can't break me, I don't back down.
And I'm the one who makes them.
The show stars Omar Sy in the role of Assane Diop, who is this immigrant, I guess, from Senegal.
Yeah, like he immigrated to France when he was, I guess, a kid. When he was a kid, when he was like in a preteen, I guess you could say.
A young ward.
Yeah, young ward with his father.
And his father was a chauffeur for this really wealthy, rich family that's, you know, all sorts of privilege, like the worst kind of privilege you can think about. And the story goes basically, and we're kind of entering spoiler territory here, is that this white family, this Pellegrini family, had a really expensive necklace
that once belonged to Marie Antoinette. I think they point out. That's
right. Yeah, and it's worth millions and millions of euros. It went missing. The homeowner accuses the chauffeur. The chauffeur, as far as we know, is innocent. Long story made short, the chauffeur, so the main character's dad, he ends up killing himself in prison, and his son grows up an orphan. But his son grows up and fairly successful because he's a master thief, inspired by this fictional character called Arsène Lupin, which is a nicknamed the Gentleman Burglar.
And it's like a series of books in France, I guess.
Right, exactly. And so Omar Sy basically becomes Lupin, where he is sort of like a Robin Hood type, where he's an anti-hero and he's a burglar, but he's a gentleman about it. He's smart, he's handsome, he's a master of disguise because he's so charismatic. He's very much the villain that you kind of root for.
Yeah, and he seems to only take targets who he thinks, like you were saying, a kind of a Robin Hood situation where he goes after people who are more powerful, who are holding their power over others, and he kind of tips the scales.
Right. And so I had heard that this was good, and I was, you know, kind of skeptical because I always am when people are like, oh, this is great, this is the best ever. I've only a couple episodes in, and you're a little further ahead than me, but I was surprised how casual it is, how sort of like a cartoon, how lighthearted it can be. It doesn't really seem to take anything super seriously. I don't know if you felt that though.
Yeah, that's actually one of the better kind of ways of describing it that I now that I think about it. Yeah, because I was watching the 4th episode yesterday, and it's they've got Netflix, at least in Canada, releasing it in what they call a part 1, which is 5 episodes, about 45 minutes each. And I assume, you know, now that it's been doing well, they might do subsequent parts, subsequent seasons, I guess. I was thinking last night about how it's not a particularly violent show. There's not a lot of like...
It's not violent.
There's a couple of depictions of suicide. You know, there's like his father in prison and stuff like that. But you never see any real like... there's no guns being fired. There's not a whole lot of fight scenes or anything like that. And because of how practiced Hassan is at his burglary, none of his like techniques really test him in any way. Like he always has a solution for everything. It's very much like an Ocean's 11 kind of situation where he's always 15 steps ahead, and there are occasional changes in plan that he has to do because something unanticipated happens. But then you almost always get at the end of the episode that kind of familiar heist film conclusion where they actually rewind to the beginning and they show you, all those things that you thought were happening were actually sleights of hand or misdirection. And here's what was really happening, which, always gives you a bit of an endorphin rush because you're like, oh, okay, cool. There's actually something else happening, a bit of flair, you know?
All that's fine, but it just feels like a cartoon. And it kind of just makes you want to laugh a little bit because even in the first episode, you know, you got the dumb goons, right? You got the dumb security guards. You got the auction people who are just like hoity-toity. And the guy who's leading the auction is this like kind of a flamboyant character. And then you got the scruffy bearded cop who, you know, deduces really early on that this guy is the modern day Arsène Lupin, but no one in his force believes him.
Right.
So you're kind of already setting up this cat and mouse game. And, you know, it's not like Lupin is Inspector Gadget where he's got all these like fancy tools and stuff.
Right.
But the scenarios he gets himself in are just like, it almost seems impossible to me for him to pull things off so easily.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Yeah.
If you think about the first episode, and I mean, I don't care, but we're going to spoilers. But you know how he puts the necklace in the garbage bag?
Yes.
And then retrieves it later. And right in the middle of the floor, he just like pulls out the necklace from the garbage bag. It's not even a bag or anything. It's like a bare necklace.
Yeah.
And he just looks at it and he just pockets it. And you're thinking the entire time going like that doesn't really make any sense. Like if he was as smart and careful as he was, it would have been put in like a nondescript bag or something like that, right? And that the part where the owner of the necklace doesn't seem to really recognize him, or at least hints towards recognizing, but not really. That I felt kind of like a little bit like an action pick, you know, like the trope where is he or isn't he this guy that I know from the past? You know, is he good or bad? Like it really teases you with it. I was just surprised how lighthearted it is. Even at the end, where at the end of the first episode, where the getaway car is that Ferrari, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it kind of drives off, and it goes through the glass floor at the Louvre, and it's just like a whole mess. It's just like criminals trying to like slither and, you know, yell things at each other.
Yeah.
It lacked a lot of the seriousness that I thought would come with it.
Yeah, I think I did. Going into it, I pictured more of a serious, like almost like an espionage thriller kind of vibe, and it very much doesn't have that. And I think maybe, I don't know a whole lot about the book series that it's based on, but we see how Hassan gives the first book to his teenage son partway through because he thinks, you'll be interested in this. So that to me kind of suggests that maybe in France, Arsène Lupin is more targeted at preteens and teenagers. So maybe we're getting kind of like a slightly simplified, cleaned up type of show here, which is not supposed to be quite as mature and gritty and filled with subtext. Like you're not getting super complicated character relationships, or Hassan is not faced with any real heavy duty moral kind of problems.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward because they present Lupin early on, or Hassan, I should say, as like a genuine hero. Like he's a nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also curious, like in the later episodes, do we ever see him hone his skills? Like, does he ever have a mentor? Like, how does he become this orphan teenage boy to who he is today? Because I imagine that craft takes time to perfect.
Yeah. No, they never mention a mentor. I mean, I guess, you know, they could definitely add that character in at a future date. But so far, it seems like when he's asked about it by other characters, he always says, "Oh no, I just studied the book over and over. I read it a million times over and just practiced a lot." And
that's so ridiculous.
You're expected to suspend your disbelief quite a bit, and just allow for the fact that the cops are going to be bungling the investigation the whole time, and that none of these people that Asan crosses paths with are going to recognize him, and that he's got a solution for everything, and it seems to just come to him very naturally, and he doesn't meet a whole lot of resistance. There's probably the scariest thing that happens to him is, I can't remember if it was like the second or third episode, but he allows some drug dealers in a prison to shank him, so that he ends up in the prison infirmary, because he needs to talk to a guy who's holed up there long term in the infirmary. And I'm like, whoa, that's
like Prison Break.
Yeah, it's kind of intense. Like, I mean, that's like he obviously allows himself to get stabbed. They don't show the actual guy stabbing him. They just show like the bloody shank falling to the ground in the prison yard. But so again, they're cleaning it up a little bit.
So like, yeah, I'm with you. I expected something grittier. So I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, and I definitely don't think it's as good as everyone says.
I can see now why it kind of shot up on the top 10 lists, because it is very mainstream.
It's harmless fun.
Harmless fun. Right? It doesn't expect a lot from you. Maybe they could, if they, like we were saying, if they get more parts, release more seasons, maybe they could do a bit more of the gritty stuff. But I feel like this is the overall vibe of the show now.
Yeah.
That's fine. If that's what people like, then.
You ever seen Detective Conan, which is this like Japanese anime series?
No.
Okay, so very briefly, it reminds me of that, where you deal with like really heavy stuff like suicide, murder, theft, blah blah blah, but it's always shown in like a very lighthearted manner, so that you never forget that this is just purely entertainment, and that's what I took away from it. Speaking of entertaining, WandaVision. I am pleasantly surprised how much I've been liking the show so far.
So am I.
Especially the most recent episode.
We now have first-person intel from inside the Westview anomaly.
What are we looking at here? Is it an alternate reality, time travel?
It's a sitcom.
Starring 2 Avengers?
It's a working theory.
Well, I know the apron is a bit much, dear, but I am doing my best to blend in.
So the beginning was like slow, right? And you kind of got the idea, and we both talked about this too, about how like clearly she has invented Westview to protect herself and insulate herself.
Yeah, they kind of dropped that breadcrumb right at the end of episode 2. And it's at that point, and
it's the only way that could really explain the things that was going on, right?
Yeah, like you hear the voice in episode 2 of the person who we come to see is Jimmy Woo, played by Randall Park, saying, "Who's doing this to you, Wanda? Who's doing this to you?" So at that point, we don't know enough about the setup yet to understand, but there's still a possibility that maybe Wanda and Vision have been trapped in there by some supervillain.
Yeah, fair.
That's still a possibility, but they close that door a couple of episodes later by revealing, and this is one of the biggest parts of the most recent episode 5, that Wanda is just grieving so much about losing Vision, and how this government agency SWORD has taken ownership of Vision's body following the events of Infinity War, and I guess Endgame too, because this seems to be post-Endgame. That's another thing we've learned.
Yeah.
That she has created this reality for her to live in, and she's kind of going back to the mindset that she was in before the Avengers crossed paths with her in Ultron.
Right. I was gonna say too, it's starting to become more interesting because there's more conflict, especially between her and Vision. Before that, it was just kind of like a shtick, like the 50s, 60s, 70s sitcom. But now we're really going somewhere, and we're also finding out how it ties into the Marvel universe. That was always one of the key questions. Like, how do these shows tie in? Like, are they just going to be spin-offs and random adventures, or are they going to tie into a bigger story? And it really feels like they are. I kind of want to skip ahead, but do you want to skip ahead to the end the big cliffhanger at the end.
Well, we can get to that, but we should set up a few things first. So like we do get a bit of an info dump in episodes 4 and 5. We learn, like I was saying, that this seems to be taking place post Endgame. So the character that we knew as Geraldine is actually the daughter of Maria Rambeau, who was Captain Marvel's best friend. And she had been sucked into Westview while trying to investigate it alongside Jimmy Woo. And as part of the Sword's investigation, they've learned a lot about who these people in Westview are, the nature of their relationships. They're all being held prisoner. So that has really filled things out. I have to hand it to Disney and the kind of brain trust out there, because just like The Mandalorian, they're not stringing us along in these episodes. They do drop a few breadcrumbs, but they give us the answers to the mysteries only a couple of episodes later. You know, they're doing that in Mandalorian too, where they, you know, at first I talked about how the first 2 episodes of this show reminded me of Lost, in that they were laying out all these mysteries. But now, by the time the 5th episode has rolled around, everything has been resolved up until now. We know who the Beehive guy is, and we know why colors were changing from black and white to color, and you know, we know the relationships.
This is Marvel's genius, where like obviously Kevin Feige has planned this whole thing out and everything just falls into place. It's not like a Damon Lindelof thing where he creates a thread that's so interesting but just abandons it because he's not quite sure what to do with it.
Yeah, everything
in here is leading to something. So the fact that Darcy Lewis comes back from the Thor movies and shows up in this.
Yes.
Jimmy Woo, Monica Rambeau. She even mentions Captain Marvel by name. And we're sort of led to believe that there was some sort of falling out.
Yes.
Between her as a kid and her growing up. And so I think it's really interesting. It adds so much to like the dynamics, because sometimes with these superhero films, we're kind of forced to accept that one dynamic. So if you think about, say, Wolverine and Xavier, so they're kind of like enemies at first, then they become friends, then they become great friends for the rest of their lives, right? It's kind of like a straight line.
Right.
But in this Marvel universe, they're changing allegiances, they're ups and downs with all sorts of various relationships. And Scarlet Witch is a perfect example, where she was kind of the enemy and brainwashed, she becomes Avenger, and now she's very much anti-Avenger, or at least anti-human world.
Yeah, she's kind of retreated into herself. She's created this fictional universe. She's holding all these people hostage. And it definitely, it shakes things up a little bit. It means that the marketing that they did before this show came out was a perfect teaser, because at the time we didn't know, for example, who
we had zero clue.
Yeah, we didn't know who Catherine Hahn's character was. We thought maybe she was the villain, maybe she was or an emissary of the villain or something. So it turns out that they did a really good job of just sprinkling those breadcrumbs and just leading us down the path, and now we are with this this most recent episode that feels very much like an extension of the broader MCU. You know, it does not feel sectioned off in any meaningful way, while still being like a smaller scale stakes kind of thing, where we're not dealing with like the end of the world or anything like that. So yeah, do you want to get before we end, do you want to talk about this big reveal that they do at the end of episode 5?
Yes. As you know, like, not many things really surprise me, and I'm one of those people who, like, for the most part, don't mind spoilers when it comes to movies. So when my friend texted me, he's like, "Have you seen the latest episode?" And I said, "No." He's like, "Well, there's a spoiler. Do you care for it?" And I said, no. And he texted me and I read it, and it literally blew my mind. And like, I got so excited. I went to my TV and I watched it right on. I stopped whatever I was doing.
Wow.
Because I was intending to watch it later, but I was like, all right, I need to watch this right now. But the big spoiler is at the end of the show, when we learn that Scarlet Witch has created Westview and pretty much kicked everyone out who isn't supposed to be there, we learn that Quicksilver has returned.
Yeah,
and not just any Quicksilver, not Aaron Taylor Johnson. It's Evan Peters. It's the X-Men Quicksilver that comes in.
Yes. So that's Disney saying in a very big way, look, we bought Fox a couple of years ago. We got rights to all those characters after all this time. Everyone, all of the comics blogs and the movie blogs were wondering, how are they going to fold these characters into the universe? And this is our first hint.
And now we know.
Yeah. So now we know that, like, I assumed when that acquisition happened that they were just going to recast all the X-Men characters and clean break.
I kind of assumed that too.
But now, if Evan Peters is in here, that means that they could pick and choose from some of the existing X-Men performers. That we know that Hugh Jackman probably won't come back as Wolverine unless something big happens on that front.
You mean, by something big, you mean buttloads of money.
Buttloads of money, yeah. And but I think as an artist, I think Hugh Jackman has kind of said like Logan was his final outing, and it was a good ending for the character and for his time as the character.
I agree with him. But
we could see Patrick Stewart come in as Professor X. We could see we won't see Jennifer Lawrence. We're pretty confident that she's done and dusted with.
She shouldn't, come back.
Yeah,
either.
she's not super invested in that world anymore. Anyway, you can see Sophie Turner come in as Phoenix / Jean Grey. Any of those people. So
I really loved the young X-Men cast. So other than Jennifer Lawrence, of course, I thought Sophie Turner, Alexander Shipp, Ty Sheridan, I thought the casting was really spot on. It's just unfortunate that they made shitty movies.
Yeah.
But here's my question, and this is kind of like pervasive throughout all superhero mashups and altered timelines and whatnot. So if Evan Peters as Quicksilver is a young adult during the 60s or 70s, whatever it is, shouldn't he be like a full-blown like middle-aged man by this point?
Yeah, well, and here's where things get really kind of wild and comic booky, I guess, because Scarlet Witch seems just as surprised as anyone else that this guy who calls himself her brother and has his hairstyle the same way has shown up at her door. So she clearly is kind of still getting used to her ability to actually, like, I guess, reconstitute matter like she did with her kids.
Although, like, Rambo did tease earlier in the episode that they needed someone special to, like, penetrate that wall or whatever that Wanda had put up.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of your first hint. But yeah, the aging thing, like, are we looking at multiple universes now? Like, if you drop Sophie Turner, like, right now into this world, it'd be like, she hasn't aged in like the 30 years since. It doesn't make any sense. In this Marvel universe, assuming the X-Men are around at the same time, these should all be like semi-retired, like people in their 40s and 50s,
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how that fold that in. It is interesting that they use Evan Peters without like the aging makeup, or maybe he did, but it was really difficult to tell.
No, he seemed to be pretty much the same age that he was in the last X-Men outing, which I can't.
Yeah.
Was he in the Phoenix one that everyone hated?
Yes, he was, because there was the same sequence where he saved everyone from the X-Mansion and was blowing up. But he didn't have a big role. But at the same time, like, again, the timelines don't really match up.
Yeah. I guess this is part of it's kind of like what's happening over in the Spider-Man universe where...
Right. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield.
Yeah, and you can argue that Endgame kind of kicked it off in a way, because for the longest time, a lot of these cinematic universes weren't really playing around too much with time travel or with multiple dimensions. But then,
yeah, they just had to introduce it. It's a rabbit hole now.
Yeah, but with Spider-Verse, I guess, was even predated Endgame. Like, Spider-Verse set up the possibility for multiple iterations of characters to cross over with each other. And Endgame continued it with the time travel concept. And now we've got characters from previously non-coexisting franchises crossing over into each other. So there's a lot of stuff that Kevin Feige and the Brain Trust are going to have to do to kind of establish what the rules of this partnership is and who can pop up where.
But it's exciting because I really don't know where the series is going now.
Yeah.
Like, if Scarlet Witch ends this miniseries and becomes the villain for like the next phase, I would not be surprised. If her and Quicksilver team up with the X-Men at the end of the series, I would not be surprised. If Scarlet Witch comes back and becomes sort of the strongest Avenger as she was supposed to be and becomes the leader of the new Avengers, I wouldn't be surprised either. I think it could go all sorts of different directions and just them laying the seeds. And plus, we also got the TV trailer or the debut of Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Right.
And I'm sure that will actually bring more light to whatever's been going on as well. Because Baron Zemo's back, right? And did he die in Civil War? I can't remember exactly. Or did he escape? I thought he died.
I can't remember. It's too many movies ago. But yeah, I don't think he died because they're not really about killing off their enemies.
Well, if they do, they just bring them back.
But your note about how Scarlet Witch could become the big bad of the foreseeable future is an interesting one, because there is a line in that episode where they say, oh, Scarlet Witch could have killed Thanos if X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So they use that line, I think, to kind of establish a baseline. They're like, yeah, she's just as powerful as Thanos. She could have killed him.
Yeah.
So,
and she's totally gone rogue, right? So,
and that would be an interesting dynamic too. You know, if she became the big bad for a while, and then maybe some other villain from the Marvel pantheon comes in to kind of challenge her, recruit her, or something.
Well, yeah, because if you're going to reunite her with Quicksilver, the next logical reunion is Magneto.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So if you have Magneto, you have Quicksilver, you have Scarlet Witch, you have a pretty strong brotherhood of mutants already. And, I mean, I hate to speculate, but I kind of get lost in these comics because it's all over the place. But there's a series called House of M, where Wanda is one of the biggest villains in the mutant universe, and she ends up killing a whole bunch of superheroes along with it. Or I think she takes away a lot of their powers or something like that. So I can see them heading down that path.
Okay.
I'm genuinely excited. This is actually one of the better shows out there. And I was kind of lukewarm about Falcon and the Winter Soldier because I wasn't too invested in either of those two characters.
Yeah, neither was I.
Yeah, but now, like, I'm curious about what they do in that show too. So kudos to Disney for like reeling me in with this stuff. It's never gonna end, Robert. Like, we better get used to it. I do think there is a bit of a pullback in interest because there hasn't been like this big film that they're building up to. But I imagine 10 years from now, we'll have another big, huge superhero team up that's just going to make billions and billions and billions.
Yeah, it's you know, as we talked about before, when Disney revealed their slates of all the shows they're working on, both in the Star Wars universe and in the Marvel universe. I mean, it's clear that they just want it so that we never watch anything that's not Disney ever again. And I mean, I will say personally, I'm not enough of a fan to indulge them. I think there will be a cutoff for me. There'll be certain shows like unless something truly wild happens on
you say that now.
Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like I'm probably not going to watch that show when it premieres. They're going to have to do a lot of work to interest me in that, because
I'll watch it and I'll tell you how good it is.
Okay, yeah, you do that. I mean, but I watched WandaVision only kind of with a passing interest, and now here I am.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
into it. So yeah, you have to give their story department a lot of credit. You know, there's a lot to be said for planning these things out and making it feel like, you know, we're not being strung along and they're making stuff up as they go along, like Star Wars.
That's right. Well, you know what? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's going to be Star Wars film and you're going to be all over that stuff again.
Hey, well, I mean, honestly, I'm going to be all over Star Wars no matter what happens.
Really? You think Star Wars has enough clout with you that no matter how badly they screw up, you're always going to be vested?
Right now, they still have a lot of goodwill with me. I mean, the shows, like I said, I'm not going to watch all the shows. I'm not going to watch the Cara Dune show or the Cassian Andor show or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'll continue to watch The Mandalorian. I probably won't watch the Boba Fett show unless, again, there's some really compelling reason to get into it.
Well, that's partly because I think we feel cheated that the Mandalorian was kind of like an extended trailer for Boba Fett, or at least that last episode was.
I'm more interested in the Obi-Wan show. I think that just because I like Ewan McGregor as an actor.
With Hayden Christensen?
Again,
I'm hoping he's not. Come on, Hayden.
No, I'm hoping he's in it in like cameos or something, because I won't be able to.
You know he's not. Anakin was always more interesting, I think.
Huge sigh. Anyway, the Star Wars thing that I'm most excited for is their flashback 200 years in the past, this High Republic stuff they're working on that's currently only being done in comic books and novels, but that is the groundwork that they're doing for the next movie. So I guess Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron movie will come out on Disney Plus in between then and now.
I'd forgotten about that. Wow.
The next big theatrical movie is supposed to be based on this story that they're setting up 200 years before the events of the Skywalker saga. But yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that.
Which is actually a great way to end the episode.
Yeah, so like I said, there's a full review of Promising Young Woman up there on the website in case you'd like to take a look. I'm thinking of doing a review of Malcolm and Marie as well, so keep your eyes open for that.
In the meantime, please give us a shout out on social media. J. Robert Snow on Twitter, Jason Chen 16 on Twitter. You can find us on Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, please click subscribe. Please click like, give us a rating. It'll help us be more visible to all the other potential listeners that are out there, aside from family members. But without any further ado, my name is Jason Chen.
And my name is Robert Snow. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.